this evening event is one of the events that the International Space University Space Studies Program put together to share some of the knowledge and discussions with the public of Cork here. And this evening, we're very fortunate to have a very distinguished panelist to talk about a very important topic, which is the future of education. So before we begin, please just make sure you turn your phones to silent. And in case there is a fire alarm, there is doors on the right, on the left, and there is behind the building on the left as well. So with this one, we'd like to start the panel with Niall, who's going to be the moderator today, Dr. Smith. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Omar. So tonight I'll be moderating the panel. For those of you who haven't been at one of these events before, for the first half of the session, we'll have a discussion amongst the panelists, and then we'll go into a Q&A session afterwards. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to say a few words about their background, who they are, and if they have a particular burning comment they want to make about the future education or not. And then we'll start off with a discussion that I hope will be both lively and somewhat controversial. Let's please all not agree with one another. I can see that won't be maybe so difficult. So I'll start with you, Deva.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Dava Newman. I'm the Apollo Professor of Astronautics at MIT. And really incredible to be back at the summer program of International Space University. Quick bio. Maybe you should know I helped found the International Space University back in 1987, 1988 when we had our first summer program. So it really is a very heartfelt thanks that I'm back, and believed in this kind of multidisciplinary international education as something very special for the future of our leaders of space my entire life for the last 30 years. As a Apollo Professor of Astronautics at MIT, my specialty is in aerospace biomedical engineering. All that means is I'm very passionate about getting people to Mars. So we're on our watch to think about the future of becoming an interplanetary species. And so our life is exploration. My partner, Gitrati, is here, a founding member of the Department Chair of Space Architecture from International Space University way back when. And we've sailed around the world on our sailboat to teach students about exploration by sea and space. So that really is our life, exploring on the seas or Earth, or in the future, getting folks to Mars. And I was very honored the last 2 years to serve in the Obama administration, to serve as NASA's deputy administrator. And what a joy to join all my NASA colleagues and friends and to be able to have that position the last 2 years. I've resigned in January, now back at MIT. And it's great to be back to the future generation. Anyone who's in school, raise your hand. Out there, any type of anyone who's a student. If you're in school, well, I call you the Mars generation. So it's great to return to teaching and you know, to think about what we can do to really enable what you're all going to really accomplish. So pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Right. Thank you very much, Deva. My name is Barry O'Connor. I'm sure some of you have seen me around the place for the last wee while. I'm the Registrar and Vice President for Academic Affairs here in CIT. I guess I began my professional life as an electrical engineer, and I worked in the food industry both here and in the UK. And from there I went into the university in the road here for a quarter of a century. That was a quarter of the last century, where I guess my interest was trying to apply new technologies to a traditional industry, which is the food industry. So I did a lot of work in sort of automation and sensors and process optimization and so on. And I guess that would be still my main interest from a research point of view, even though for the last, I suppose, 10, 11 years I've been here in CIT. And my present incarnation is all about the academic quality, I suppose advising as well on the curriculum and standards we apply, and dealing with the student experience and so on. Having been head of School of Mechanical and Process Engineering here for a couple of years before taking on the current role. As VP for Academic Affairs, I guess I'd have a lot of interest in and responsibility for what goes into our curricula, and in particular, if you want to call it future-proofing, in terms of all our degrees here in CIT are professionally focused degrees, be they accounting or engineering, or biomedical science, or recreational leisure, tourism, hospitality. It's all about getting students professionally ready for the careers they're choosing now. But as we know, the careers they're choosing now will not be the careers they'll end up with. In terms of the new jobs that are coming down the horizon, not least the jobs that are coming in space. And I guess from my point of view, in terms of what's happening in space engineering, we know for the fact that a lot of the developments that we benefit from here on Solar Pharma come from what has happened in the space industry, whether it is in our days it was microelectronics, then nanoelectronics and so on. So even some of the projects I'd have worked on in the past, in terms of, say, like the electronic tongue, electronic nose, even some complicated inline sensors used in the biotechnology industry, all come from the miniaturization and the developments that happen in the space programs. So it's great to be sharing a platform with a colleague from MIT, because as we are CIT, we are Cork MIT, if you like, in our own way. So I look forward to a good discussion tonight.
Thank you. So I'm Parfedik Hagemark. I'm with LinkedIn Learning Solutions. I'm here not at all for my space credentials, as you can understand, but for my strong belief that learning is the one true superpower that each one of us have. And the way we use and apply that through our life is what makes a difference to our life and the organizations and people we work with. LinkedIn do learning because the overall mission for LinkedIn is to create economic opportunity for every person of the global workforce. Skills and constant learning is a key component to that. So that's the reason why LinkedIn is doing that. We work very much in the here and now with organizations. So we work both with companies and universities to provide over 10,000 courses that you can use as they are, or break them down into just taking a small micro pieces of that to create the learning and get it at the point of need when you need it to learn. So we'll throw out some controversy directly. You can talk about academic degrees more as a just-in-case learning, maybe, and then direct stuff when you learn here and now in your real life is just-in-time learning. Not being judgmental about it, but that sort of speed and directness is what we solve and help our customers with. That's often what we hear, in terms of it's like a knowledge insurance. We have this library that's always evolving, and we can just go to that when we have a need. We don't even know what we need to learn, but we have access to it, and it's vast, and we can find what we need when we need it. So that's where I'm coming from here tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Gerald O'Sullivan. You may have been wondering how to pronounce that name. I'll say it one more time, and you'll all be tested on the way out, okay? So it's both the spelling and the pronunciation, Gerald O'Sullivan. So I'm from CIT, just like Barry and Noel, and as Barry has said, we're the MIT of Cork. I hadn't heard that before, but it's a good line. I'm the head of the Department of Technology Enhanced Learning. So we're all about that space where teaching meets technology, if you like. So that means a number of different things for us here in CIT. We support the use of technology as a complement to face-to-face delivery. We also encourage the growth of fully online programs. Maybe there'll be some time to talk about some of the positive stories, I suppose, that have come out of some of those online courses. We do a lot of it with a very, I guess, egalitarian spirit, and the belief that online is a way of breaking down a lot of political and social and economic barriers. And we have a lot of very positive stories from students who've taken our online courses who couldn't otherwise commit to coming to a bricks and mortar institute. We have ongoing research also. We're 50% externally funded, and I guess the exploratory research we do and the mainstream stuff we do stand in the way of each other like a kind of a virtuous cycle, you could say. So from the mainstream stuff that we do, we get end-user insights, and those end-user insights bring a certain realism to the exploratory research that we're doing, which in turn, as you might have been anticipating, feeds back into the mainstream then. So it ensures the currency of our provision, and it future-proofs things. So there's always a next big thing. We're going to be talking about a lot of next big things tonight. So we're looking at things like game-based learning, augmented reality, virtual reality, learning analytics, all of that stuff. In general, as an individual, I've been working in this whole kind of space for about 20 years now, and very much looking forward to contributing, if I can, to the discussions tonight. Thank you.
Okay, so our first learning is we have 3 microphones here on stage. So I'll grab this one. So we just learned there are 3 microphones on stage. So for an education panel, I think that's a very positive, constructive start. So actually, Frederick, you mentioned something there about the just-in-time, just-in-case. So one of the things, maybe just, and by the way, we agreed in advance that we're not just going to necessarily go around our 4 of us with the same question. So we're going to let this flow a little bit more. But I'm just going to address this one, if I may, to you. So we're talking about, for example, going to Mars, so you might want to jump in at some point, David, but so we need to prepare people for the future, obviously, and things that we might try to anticipate, but companies also need people with skills right now. So do you see any issues there with how our educational system both addresses the here and now and the economics of, if you like, today and the next couple of years, which is often the survival life cycle of particularly the small and medium enterprises, versus, let's say, grand challenges for the future for civilization or for humanity? And how do we balance those two, or do we balance, or maybe if this was an essay, just discuss?
Is it? Yeah, you did. Yeah, the real answer requires more than the hour we have, I think. But when we talk about it, and also talking with the people we work with, it's like different speeds. So like a university and long-term education and everything that comes with it, the research, critical thinking, by default has to be moving at a certain pace, whereas market conditions in the retail industry or somewhere else can change really fast. You have transportation, which is changing completely in front of us right now. It's self-driving vehicles, battery, electric. It's changing so much quicker than academic institutions sometimes can follow that with. So the direct access to new things, and a lot of things that we end up helping with, is the digitization of the world. I think that's one of the big drivers where we see very fast change. We see in studies that up to 90% of companies are not comfortable with their own position vis-a-vis the digital world today, how to use the tools individually and how to maximize their business with these tools as well. It creates a stress factor. We actually normally talking to the learning and development units within companies, but we have recently actually talked to the people who are worried about health in the workplace, because digital stress is becoming something, for instance, where just understanding of both the tools, but also how to work with them, how to work remotely, and these things are things you need. And then the smaller and medium-sized companies that you talked about, for them to be agile and on a small budget, they can't hire a new skill if they realize they need it, but if they can go and train for something very quickly in a project, in a team, and work with that, and that is something that really drives productivity for the smaller and medium-sized companies, where they can really quickly acquire a skill. And that, the foundation that's required, though, is a culture of learning within the organization. So they actually, it's okay to learn. It's okay not to know and to raise your hand, but also then step forward and try to learn. I think that's the foundation that sort of is needed, whatever the tool and actual solution is.
Barry, did you want to say something? So,
hello? Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to the question both what to learn and how to learn. And that's an evolving continuum the whole time. And the 3 aspects we would look at would be, as you know yourself, teaching, research, and industry. So it's research-informed industry, and industry-informed teaching, and teaching-informed research. So it's a continuum. And if we keep our education, what we do as education providers, if we keep that linked in with not just with the current needs of industry,
but by doing proper research, by seeing what's down the road and encouraging industry, particularly, okay, maybe in larger economies like the States, like France, like the UK, you know, a lot of industries would have their own think tanks and research setups. In smaller economies like Ireland and a lot of the smaller countries across the world, they're depending on the third level institutions to do the research for them, to point the way ahead, so that, you know, so that if an industry says today we need more students who can speak Japanese, and that's for today. You know, the university or the technological institute should be able to say, well, yeah, you need some students who need to speak Japanese. By the way, Chinese is big coming down the road, or Swahili, or whatever else. So, you know, it's up to we should be deciding what is, by doing proper research, by doing informed research, what the requirements are going to be in a few years' time, or in 20 years' time. So it is the duty, I think, of the third level sector to decide what's happening, or to at least try to predict what's happening. Because industry is always looking at what the margins are like, and they're looking at very short term, and in long term, certainly here in Ireland, long term, a payback would be 5 years or 7 years on a research project. Whereas, you know, we, as a third level sector, we should be able to predict what's happening and assist industry with that, and keep our teaching programs alive and relevant from that point of view. I just come in there kind of riffing on what Barry and Fred said, and the term will probably come up anyway, but we talk a lot nowadays about how learning needs to be lifelong. And I think just to go back to what that was originally about, it's the notion that just visiting college once is no longer sufficient. It used to be you went once, you were kind of set up for life because there was a job for life, but now there are perhaps no jobs for life. We have a gig economy. People need to be a lot more flexible. Online programs, as I've mentioned, might be part of that solution, and certainly they have a lot of advantages. They can now be so media-rich and interactive and collaborative, and obviously have economies of scale, and there's ever more better ways of tracking what's happening online. But lifelong learning is also meant to be about informal learning. So it's not just about institutes of higher education. It's perhaps about the kind of things that Fred was talking about, which is people forming online communities of practice, people keeping up to date by staying in contact with each other. But finally, just to close off, I think there are things that endure. You know, there are certain things that we can learn that will carry us through a life. They may not be the things that we often focus on, perhaps, in our curriculum, but, you know, stuff like interpersonal skills, critical thinking, cognitive flexibility.
If I might, David, if you could pick up maybe on that point, I was just thinking, going to Mara, so it's multidisciplinary, it's multicultural, it's multi-annual, it's new technologies, new ways of thinking. Just maybe some thoughts you have in terms of how we start to, I'm obviously thinking of some people in the audience, for example, are thinking about how they get involved in that and where their educational routes would be. That's obviously specific to here, but also maybe in more general sense, taking up on some of the comments that the other panelists made there.
Sure. So we need all of you, first of all. That's the important thing. It's all disciplines. And again, I think that the future of education, you know, why Mars, why exploration? It's really because it seems impossible, and it's about raising humanity. It's about having us excel and doing something that we really do think maybe at first glance it might be impossible, but no, it's truly possible. And I think with humanity's huge challenges we have today with climate and water and energy, and I would say exploration, those are the students who have to think about what's the education for humanity to be able to solve some of these really hairy challenges we have for humanity. I think we're up to the task, but again, I kind of couch. So we think about that in terms of education. How can we do our very best? How can we make these things possible that at first might seem impossible? But when it comes to education, I think it's about education in the future is critical thinking, creative thinking, definitely communications. So it's really teaching you how to think and how to have that dialogue. Skills are one aspect of it. And in industry, you need different skills. I think skills are evolving. We'll have the future of jobs, future of skills. But I think all of us here are actually all pretty sharp. We can do a lot of that online. I can get a lot of skill development. you can learn Python pretty well over the computer. I don't think you need to have the lecturer, the sage on the stage. I mean, that's gone as far as when I think about the future of education, I think about it as teams. So kind of it's a group sport. Where you need some coaching, you need some guidance, but again, there's a lot of skill development. Maybe you can learn, online, and that's very good. But what I think about a lot is, again, we're a residence-based institution, MIT, CIT. So that's where the magic happens. So what's the value added? Again, that's where we're really challenging students, putting them in teams and think, how can we all, make progress? Just to make progress, how can we think about this? How can we have the dialogue about some of these very big challenges? So again, I kind of divide a little bit of the skill development, but then much more of the thinking and the learning development, because that's, again, to me, that's a sweet spot of the future of education. We need it all. We need them both. But I spend my time thinking much more about the thinking, the critical learning. At MIT, you might be aware, we let 1,000 of our courses open. It's called open courseware. I was really proud of that as a faculty member, because information and knowledge should be free. We think that should be free to the world. We want any eager, interested person to gain that information. So information, knowledge free. Then, but when you're learning and developing your skills, then what's not free and where people charge money for, it's really the coming together. To me, it's the communication, it's the dialogue, it's solving things that not the single person can do.
Can I just ask in relation to that, in terms of teams, I mean, does that start in the home? What's the role of the, does it start at primary level or the earliest level? How do we get kind of this balance going forward? I'm thinking is, we've had a couple of thousand years of a fairly traditional way of doing things, and some good things have come from that. So how do we balance, if you like, what works, kind of has got us to the moon, for example, and then what is moving forward? So how much risk do we start to take? How do we test our educational system with new paradigms?
Well, it's being tested right now. And first I say, we can't rest on our laurels. MIT, we're only 150 years old. Here I am in Europe, and knowing of the great history of education here. We can go to Asia. So when you think centuries and centuries old, there are some laurels and there's wisdom. I think to always think about the future, you need to really understand your history, right? Or else we're not educated. So in thinking about the future, let's understand our history. And so again, there are some foundations and some fundamental knowledge that we want. But let's not be afraid of the risk for the future. I mean, let's grab it. Let's with open arms say, absolutely. I mean, this is a different world with online, interconnected, being global. Used to be hard from the U.S., even to travel to Europe. That was maybe a once in a lifetime. Now it's once a month for me. It's just a very different day and age. We have a global, our whole audience, we're all global citizens. So I think we have to think about that for the future too. And then, what's in terms of education, we open up all these opportunities globally for all of us. And that's more interesting, isn't it? To work with everyone around the world and bring in someone. I don't want to work with all aerospace engineers, that's for sure. I like diversity of thought and intellect and about everything you can get. And we actually have the scholarship on this. We actually know that diverse teams are actually what causes excellence. If everyone's like me and that's all I'm talking to, that's probably not going to be as good as I can do. I need to be around people who think very differently than me, because they're going to, challenge me to think differently.
Could I just make a small commercial from our point of view here in CIT? Every student who comes in here to first year in CIT does what we call the CIT module, which is creativity, innovation, and teamwork. From day one, every student must do it. And it's slightly customized depending on which field of study you're following. But the key word there is creativity, and at the end, the teamwork. And it is about, as everyone has said, communities of practice, communications, engaging with other people. Because none of us will, no man is an island. We will never solve any problems on our own. And I do think sometimes in terms of the online, maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but you can get the information delivery online. But it's only when you're sitting down discussing with colleagues, or even, dare I say, with a lecturer, that the questions can be asked and they can be answered, and new questions can come up. And that's why I think that the whole future-proofing thing, you develop the skills, but you develop the skills based on the technology or the needs of the community for the here and now. But if you do that right, as has happened over the last several thousand years, we're still using the algebra developed by Pythagoras. and his colleagues way back when, you know. So we're standing on the shoulders of what went before us. Now we do need to continue to build and not rest on our laurels. But I think the key thing is the engagement and the communications and getting to talk with other people and work with other people. And I think, you know, that, again, think of the CIT module: creativity, innovation, and teamwork. And the three of those, if our students get those in the first year, they'll carry on. And it's a commercial for CIT, but it's actually, it does work, you know.
Just as David and Barry were talking, I was thinking, I don't know, have people heard about the work of Sugata Mitra, who's got this kind of a pedagogical approach that he calls self-organized learning, but it came out of an experiment that he did in the slums of New Delhi, where he put a computer in a hole in the wall and passers-by could interact with it if they wished. And after just an hour or two, he noticed there was a group of kids teaching each other how to surf the web, and out of that he's kind of abstracted a whole, it's not even a new pedagogy, it's just some kind of observation about, I guess, as our MIT colleague says, that learning is a team sport, and people will, if put in the right kind of context and given the right kind of scaffolding, they'll very, very naturally fall into this way of doing things. So that was what it reminded me of.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think the new constellations of the existing ways of learning and doing things, it's also what drives things forward and creates things that make that magic. And coming back to your point, you know, I, for the sake of discussion, took an extreme standpoint maybe on one point. You know, all we see, for instance, with online learning is when it really works is when you do blend it with what you do in a classroom. Like, completely correct. The magic happens in the classroom. Like, what you do within walls with real humans is what happens. But we see also, so a lot of universities, for instance, that add online learning, they see, for instance, a typical teacher often see, like, you know, up to a third of your time in the classroom can go to that deeper learning and thinking, because you don't talk about the technical pieces and how you use this and how that and that works. So that the time you spend in the classroom is the same, but you actually get more out of it, and different discussions, and you have different ways of exploring things, and with the diversity too, which really opens up and drives many, many more innovations over time. You know, it's those differences. I didn't know about it, but I love the example you gave. You know, you just don't know where learning is going to come from. You know, a computer stuck to a wall, and all of a sudden that happens. And the more diverse people you have in the teams and working on it, you will win. And we're actually at LinkedIn too, we subscribe to the same thing. You know, it's very simple, like diversity wins. If you want to have great teams, like, have to be diverse. That's just the one core piece too, I think, to drive our future forward.
Well, you certainly see a lot of diversity in ISU. You just have to look around at who we have here at SSP, and I didn't want to use the phrase the magic that happens, but the stuff that happens perhaps some of the time. But you get really interesting conversations. But how does that square away with differences in abilities, for example? Do you have to do something in terms of filtering? Does the diversity extend to people who are, you know, let's say technically good versus somebody who's maybe good with languages? What do we mean by the diversity of the learning teams in that sense? How diverse is diverse?
I'll take that one a little bit in terms of who do we want? We want everyone on our teams, from my perspective. I want to talk a little bit about STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. As an aerospace engineer, and spending 2.5 decades trying to raise up STEM for the U.S. internationally to really have the competitive advantage. We need technical folks. I think we got it wrong. So I call it now changing the conversation. We actually made STEM a thing. Billions of dollars spent. We made it a thing. I talked to a lot of little girls and boys, and they're young, and they say, STEM, that's not for me. Well, we got it wrong. So I think we should actually admit our failure, and again, changing the conversation now, talk to anybody and say, guess what? You don't have to be the best in math and physics and calculus. That's what I was taught. But again, there were 2 women engineers in my aerospace course out of 50, right? We weren't very diverse. So now it's a different conversation. I say you have to take math and calculus and physics, but they're tools. If you want to build a rocket to get us to Mars, if you want to solve clean water for the world, energy, and they're excited, Then I say, well, that's what engineers do. You know, that's where I come from. But guess what? Those are just tools. So I really think that we got it wrong. We have to change it. And surely, I actually am kind of bold. I call it STEAMed. I always bring in the arts. You know, I don't know how to live one day of my life without the arts. The artists paint the pictures. They tell the stories. They communicate. So I know in any team, I need them alongside as teammates and even leaders. I bring in D for design now. And that's because, again, it's the next generation. There's 3D makers all over. It's the next generation. They're building and printing before they're ever doing the analysis, and that's okay. So I think we need to change the conversation. You mentioned filtering. I don't think we need to filter anyone out. Engineering education was filtering people out. It was only for the tough and the right stuff. I'm about filtering everyone in. So if I just see a twinkle in someone's eyes about my passion, spaceflight, humans to Mars, then I said, what are you interested in? Whatever they're interested in, I know that my job is actually try to filter them into the discussion, try to help them succeed at whatever they really love to do.
Just to say, as an engineer, yeah, we were always the guys who were good at maths and calculus and so on. No, but let's be honest about this. If you want to be a mechanical engineer or a chemical engineer, electronics engineer, you've got to go by the standards of the IEEE or the IMEC or whoever else. So, there is the tension there that to design the part of an engine or to make sure that it works, you've got to be good at the calculus. You've got to be good at the engineering. Now, the trick is to add on to that the creativity and the innovation. The other trick, of course, is, and I remember I was saying to a colleague earlier, I did my doctorate back in Michigan State, again in the last century, a long time ago, but a neighbour of mine was teaching science there. And he was teaching science to future politicians, because as he said, these are the guys who are going to decide on the budgets as to whether or not we're going to design a new product, or indeed put somebody into Mars or on the moon or whatever. So I think the future should be, and we do a little bit of it here, that multidisciplinary is key. You do your undergraduate as a mechanical engineer, and then maybe you do time in biological science, or you do time in the financial area or whatever. Because the engineer who designs something that nobody wants, well, nobody wants the engineer either. People give Rolls-Royce a bad name because they always say Rolls-Royce. We were told in college what happened to Rolls-Royce was the engineers took over the company. So there is a tension. If you want to become a mechanical engineer, you've got to go by the rules of the mechanical engineering profession. But then we do need to add a lot extra to get people to work innovatively and not just stick to the basic rule book.
And just noticing, by the way, the time since we're flying, and actually we did say that we would, around a few minutes ago, actually open to questions from the floor. So if we have some questions, we'll start with that now. If you want a minute to think of a question or two, so if there are no hands up at the moment. Over here. Great. Okay. We'll just get a microphone over to you now. And thank you for starting the questions.
Hi there. So my question is about the emerging future. So we are expecting millions of jobs to be lost to automation and robotics, and this conversation is sort of directed at the younger generation, and that's fine. But a large population of the workforce is going to lose their jobs. So what do you propose to that?
So I think if we understood it, we heard right, it was thinking about current employment or in robotics, or people are going to currently use their jobs. Well, again, we have to think, what are the future jobs? I mean, I think it's incumbent upon, again, all of us, what are we going to create in terms of the future of jobs? Manufacturing jobs, old traditional manufacturing jobs, I can give you the statistics for the United States, with 17 million people employed, 5 million people lost their jobs. Those jobs are not coming back. Despite what you hear, they're gone. So what we have to think about, what are the new jobs of the future? So when it comes, again, to robotics, autonomy is huge. So, I mean, the explosion in the future of jobs in, again, the broad area of robotics and autonomy, delivery, the unpiloted vehicles now, just all over. So I really think it's a synergy between, again, robotics and looking at the autonomy, the AI. These are going to create a whole bunch of jobs for the future. They're going to be different than the jobs we have right now, and some of those jobs absolutely are going away. And so then it's a matter of how do we prepare, how do we all prepare, again, and get the skills, get the understanding for those future jobs. And then again, I think from industries, how do we create those future jobs?
And can I just say, before you come in, I think part of the question was, if there are people who lose their jobs now, how do we deal with them as well? So, you know, do we reskill them? I think that was part of what you were getting at as well.
Yeah, that's what I heard as well. That was part of what I was thinking of in my opening statement. What I'm doing is because I believe the ability to learn is the one true superpower you have as an individual, and I think these are the times when you have to step up and make the best use you can of that superpower, whatever that is. Focused act in terms of learning something else, figure that out, being it in a group, again, and the cross-functional connections and whatever connective tissue you have around you of people with experience and other things will be your guides also to help in how to then reskill to something that will bring you back into the work again if you've lost it because of automation or whatever it is.
Okay. I think we had some questions over here.
Hi. First, a comment maybe. I think it's a bit weird to have a panel about future education without a student on the panel. Just a comment. Another thing is, like, from my hearing, I heard a lot of training skills, like to provide the skills the students will need for their jobs. But looking at the word education, educare, like leading out, is that it's not only about their jobs, it's about them. Like where does higher education put in the, not providing the skills for the job, but providing the skills for their life? And I'm not meaning like teamwork and so on, because that's again jobs. Yeah.
Again, just quickly, so again, I think education is actually about the learning and the passion, actually not the skills in my perspective. At MIT, in Latin, we're mens et manus, we're mind and hand. Personally, I actually add the heart to that. I think that's education. I think it's your mind engaged with your hands and doing, and then what about the heart? You know, you as an individual, absolutely. You know, where are you going in your long journey as a student? We are, maybe we're a little bit older, but we all are students as well. I hope that we're all students on this panel as well as all of us in the audience. We sure have a lot to continue to learn.
No, if I could show you my notes here, educo, the Latin word, education is about leadership and leading out. You're completely right. The other good word for education is formation, which the French have, which means about forming. It's not just giving people skills, but forming a character and forming a personality. But maybe I'm slightly influenced from having been trained and beaten up as an engineer and dealing with a lot of sort of people in the engineering area, that unfortunately there are skills you have to learn to get past your accreditation to get your degree. But the leadership role of education is extremely important. And that's what I was saying earlier, in terms of not just leading students, but leading industry to see, and not just to see what the future is, but actually to make the future. You know, and but you're completely right. It's about leadership. I think Edmund Burke, a great Irish philosopher, said, education shall make you free. You know, and Fred said it earlier. So it is about leadership, and I agree we should have a student up here, right? But you are the leaders. You'll be paying for all nursing homes, you know. You're the leaders of the future. You're the leaders now. You're not going to become leaders in 6 months, 6 years' time. You're now the leaders. You're the guys who are looking at the hard questions and going to solve them for us. So that Smithy and myself and the rest of us here can relax. And so yeah, we did well, and they're going to look after us. Yep.
So please work hard. Carol, if you wanted to say something.
Just a very quick comment, speaking as a past student of life myself. I just completely agree there should be a student up here, but also maybe that's the answer we should have given when we were asking about what we're going to do about preparing people for future learning and performance challenges when we don't know what the jobs are going to be. And the answer is that kind of holistic education, what we used to call, I don't know, character education or development of the person. That's the stuff that endures, I guess, when all the rest of it may wither and fall by the wayside as we move into a more uncertain future.
Okay.
Yeah. Over here. Yeah, my question is about experiences with online education. I noticed that compared to MIT's enrollment of 11,000, that the open courseware has reached 200 million people, and it's a big transformation. I was just wondering about the experiences of MIT or other experiences with opening things up for online education.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, comment. I get really so OpenCourseWare, since we know we're a small place at MIT. Actually, there's only 11,000 students, 4,000 undergraduates, and then just under 7,000 postgraduates. Many more when you look at faculty and researchers, but that's very small. So we say, yeah, how can you open up knowledge to the world? So that's why we wanted to do our OpenCourseWare, make the syllabus, make the information available. So we are very proud of that, opening it up to the millions, as you mentioned, hundreds of millions of people. Now, actually, there is a different model, though, in terms of what's called MITx and edX, joining with universities and consortium, thinking about continue to give the information, but then in terms of thinking about certification or giving certificates, have you back to the you do have to learn something, and so these MOOCs are online courses, but the retention rate is incredibly low. So in that sense, they failed. They failed miserably when you have these MOOCs when 100,000 people sign up even to take Calculus 1, and only 100 finish. So then again, we think, well, maybe there could be a certificate. So people are doing it obviously to learn the material, but they're also doing it a little bit of pride. They want to make sure that they are making the mark. And so we are thinking about that model of how do you give people perhaps a certification that they have passed it, because again, when you're opening it up to everyone, you do want to have some assessment of how's the learning going. Have you mastered, can you comprehend some of the main themes? So again, it's kind of a balance. It's really a moving target in terms of opening up as much as you can, but then also quality control.
Just to give credit, I think, to MIT, they really, I think, were responsible for launching a whole movement we now refer to as the Open Educational Resources Movement, which to me was kind of a borrowing over of that whole open source ideology, I guess, from the open source movement, which is about people coming together in sort of self-organized, voluntary ways, creating things of value for egalitarian reasons. And I think that continues on. We know the MOOC movement didn't maybe deliver what it was meant to, but maybe there was a bit of a hype cycle about that as well, and certain other things continue on, certainly, so a lot of people are into releasing their stuff as a Creative Commons, in a Creative Commons way, and have adopted a sort of a remix approach, I guess, to some of the learning objects, some of the content that's out there. I guess as well with the MOOC movement, maybe it was just this really big, interesting experiment, and I think we learned a lot maybe about the way that people learn online and don't learn online and why they learn online. And it was also, I think, a great big success for online in the public imagination. So many people tried out MOOCs. Maybe they never intended to finish, but it opened their minds to this new way of learning.
I just would like to hear what you guys are thinking about the dichotomy between complexity and complicated approaches to some of the challenges of our time. And to some extent, it seems like the answer has been hyper-specialization and creating very early specialists, and then teamworking and collaboration as a bridge between these silos of knowledge. So what do you think, instead of maybe embracing a more generalistic approach in the Renaissance kind of acception of the term, where you get a common ground and a common set of languages and patterns and ways of seeing things that are not typically easy to bridge with people that have completely different mindsets. So, and what we saw also in these days in some of the workshops, if you have people that are coming from very different backgrounds, it's good for diversity, but it's a big challenge in terms of integrating the knowledge and also finding common ground in really talking and thinking alike. So not with the same ideas, but being able just to orchestrate a complex issue, So what do you think about the importance or what are you trying to do in forming generalists that can talk to specialists and be more open to different disciplinary efforts?
Maybe just one of the first events in this venue here was Dan Tanney talking about his experience with the space station, and I think he said he did a mechanical engineering in MIT, yeah. But he said what was much more difficult than that was learning Russian to go up to the space station. So your first issue there is communication, and it's come up here all night. Communication is key to the whole thing. And of course there are efforts going on to harmonise curricula, maybe through whether it's the Washington Accord or the Bologna process. So there are sort of common teaching curricula, at least validation processes that allow sort of academic standards, professional standards to be reach some form of equilibrium, so people are approaching a problem from a similar basis. But I guess again the thing is to try, if you have multidisciplinary teams who can communicate, then you get different approaches to solving a problem, because going back to the engineering, engineers think in one way, scientists think in another way, legal minds think in a different way. So there is for example, in medical education, a lot of institutions now are teaching from a problem-solving basis. And I think that's a new way of approaching things, and it's not new, but it is a way where you look at the problem rather than saying what disciplines do we bring to it. So that's one way maybe of diversifying and seeing what the problems are, and going around the table and going around different disciplines to see how can problems be solved from a variety of different perspectives, which might allow us to travel a bit further up the knowledge and the applied knowledge chain.
Add to it's a great point on complex systems. Complex systems are complex, and I think it's not that easy. I mean, I think we need deep disciplinary understanding and expertise when you talk about, let's take climate change. One of the most complex Earth systems problem that I know of, and so what's it going to take? I think it's going to take incredible experts in all of the areas of Earth systems. I think it's also going to take some more generalist and holistic approach. We call it Spaceship Earth. I mean, I have to know about the ocean and the ocean environment. I have to know about the land. I need to know about the air. I actually need to know from near space in. NASA has 20 satellites right now looking at so this is a very complex system. And I think first we just admit it's complex. We don't understand everything. But then we try to take a look at it and say, okay, if something happens in the ocean and the corals, let's say they're affecting all the other subsystems. And so I think trying to get our heads around complex systems is a first good step. Admitting that they're very complex, don't have the answers, we don't have the solutions, and then again, getting everyone around the table that really does have very deep expertise, because again, you do want a lot of expertise, and people to say, well, I don't know everything, but I know this one system, and this is how it works, but again, listening, so that's just again some thoughts. Thank you for putting complex systems out there. Let's not pretend they're not complex, because they're not. They're very hairy, challenging, difficult in terms of those. But that's what I think we aspire to. Those are the challenges we really want to try to make some progress on.
Yeah, Carl Sagan, I think one of the many quotes one could quote from is that sometimes the maths is complicated because the universe is complicated, and it's not always easy just to reduce it to something that's simple. I think it's a real challenge, actually, as we try to understand our universe more. It becomes more complicated. Do we have a question and a microphone somewhere? Several questions.
Hello. Yes, I've got a microphone. It's a great discussion. Very excited. It's a big passion of mine about the future of education. And there's some things that you're saying that are really resonating with me. But I'd be curious to hear your comments on my perception of education is that it comes from our innate sense of curiosity. And so when I think about the future of education, I think it's about making everyone curious. And for that to happen, we have to change society and culture from a very young age. That goes way, way, way before we even get to university. So I wonder, do you consider that in any of your planning of future education? How can we change society to make everybody universally curious so that they lead their own education for themselves?
Well, thank you. I don't know you, but thank you for the question. Curiosity. It hasn't come up yet. Yes, Danny. So to me, it's all about curiosity. And every young person I know is infinitely curious and infinitely creative. So I think it's a great question. Then what happens to them through the educational process? Because every young person I know is infinitely curious about everything. And so thank you for, and play as well. Where's play gone from our learning, you know, and kind of hands-on play? So again, I just, to reiterate, and, you know, thank you for the education must all be about curiosity, and let's not lose that.
Can I just say, just as another commercial, if you want to come back here in September, 19th, 20th, right, of September, Cork City is one of only 3 globally UNESCO Global Cities of Learning, and there's a conference here in September, and we'll have 700 delegates coming from all over the world. And the point, and the key point again is here, is it's not education within these walls or the walls and institutions, it's education within the city. We have a lifelong learning festival here with over 500 events, and the bottom line for each event is that it must be learning, but the main point is it must be fun. And it's about developing, exactly as you're saying, that the city is a learning city, that the city, whether it's the city council, ourselves, the university, the further education boards, encourage learning, particularly for people who are outside the walls of the institutions. So 19th and 20th, keep in touch with Cork, the UNESCO Global Cities of Learning conference here in Cork. So keep tuned into that.
I also thought it was a really great question, and I think it's a pity that even in the literature on educational psychology, instructional design, we don't talk often enough about fun and enjoyment. We might talk about the affective domain as if it's something off there, kind of, you know, dodgy that we shouldn't really be talking about, when in fact, it, you know, even from a cognitivist point of view, it drives our selective attention, which drives our working memory, which drives the formation of long-term memories. I think it's fascinating working with young children. We've done a certain amount in the area of game-based learning, and one of the constructs I'm very interested in is the notion of islands of expertise. We know this about children. They get fascinated about Thomas the Tank Engine or dinosaurs or something like that. And that can just be used as the basis. It kind of goes back to an earlier point about anything, really. You know, you can start with Thomas the Tank Engine and obviously talk about locomotion and talk about applied maths. And if you're doing it the right way, I think you'll bring that child along with you, and that island of expertise where they're so comfortable and so interested in enjoying themselves so much can get so much bigger and, I don't know, join other islands, perhaps, without extending the metaphor too much.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Ian, and I see where this goes, but the word compassion actually comes up in my head. Like you're compassionate for that people learn differently, are curious, interested in different things. You just get it that learning itself can be really hard. It can be a complex system, but it can just be very difficult for someone to learn through reading, whereas they might want to hear. So I think a very strong drive and understanding of like building compassion for learning. If you talk about deep societal behaviors or that you need, I think would be an important piece to changing things.
All right. Well, I want to ask you, in your opinion, what do you think can be done to bridge the gap between academic institutions and industry? If you look, for example, at engineering curriculums, they haven't been updated to keep up with the technological improvements that we've been seeing here. And it's been estimated, for example, for the next 10 years, about 50 to 60% of the new jobs have not been invented yet. And so the curriculum needs to be updating constantly. There needs to be a bridge and communicating constantly between academia and industry to be able to bring the new skill sets needed for the future. So I was wondering, in your opinion, how can we improve that gap that we have between both?
I can kick off with one thing that we actually do already that seems to work. So LinkedIn is a big data company. We have 500 million individuals on there with their skills. We have companies, we have every job these companies are looking for, universities and others. So it's enough data that in certain areas to actually sit down. So we've done this in Manchester, Milan, Amsterdam. We've sat down with the main stakeholders, so the city councils, the universities, the companies, and looking at, okay, here is the skills that seem to be needed and where trends are going, what the companies are looking for. We just see it on the job postings. You know, it's increased in big data you know, and data scientists everywhere right now. Here's the universities. Here's actually what the courses and curriculum they're offering. Here are the people living in the area. Here's what they know. Here are their skills. Do we find any gaps here? So using that data as one sort of catalyst to drive these discussions further, and then come also look at what are the actions we need to take to actually see in front of you what the numbers say, basically. That's one big piece, I think, just to start looking at it from a big perspective like that.
Just to broaden it out a bit in terms of, I do some validation work with the French Commission of Engineers, Commission to Teach to Engineer, and all their programs are validated by panels of academics and industry experts every 5 to 7 years. Same here in CIT. So by constantly validating the relevance of your program, then the academics are forced, out of their comfort zone, they're forced to actually keep their programs relevant. And that is one connection. The other connection, I think, is also if universities are involved in applied research. If they're involved in applied research, they will know what's coming down the tracks and can influence what's coming down the tracks. So I think there are two ways, two working models as to how we do stay relevant to the future needs of industry.
I guess another reflection is maybe it's a false dichotomy somewhat. I mean, as we work, we learn. As we work, we have learning facilitated for us, and we evidence learning. So there are numerous approaches to this, usually under the heading of work-based learning. We talk about scaffolding people in the workplace, allowing them to evidence the learning, providing the right resources for them, and perhaps this is something that hints at a future educational partnership between the workplace and educational institutes.
I love the question in terms of industry, university. I want to make it more complex even. Something we think about is, I look at it as a three-legged stool. It's really government, university, public sector, industry, and then education or academia. And if we get that right, we have a stable stool. You can't just stand on two of those. And we've worked really hard on industry and education and back and forth, and saying where's the common ground as well. There are different time scales, I do believe. Education, academia, we're usually in a little bit for the longer, but we're really trying to say what's the state of the art, whereas industry, of course, has to, turn a profit, has a little bit shorter time scales. But when we just sat down and again communicated, say where's the common ground that we can all work on, what's exciting for both. But I do submit, I think it's really hard to do it across government, industry, and academia. I think it's much easier to do the, academic to government relationship, or industry to one of those. And I think that the challenge for all of us is how do we get all three right at the same time? What's the common ground then for all those constituents? So I look forward to working with you on.
We have another. We have several hands up. So yeah.
Hi. I just have a question. It's what I consider a bit of a dilemma at the moment, and it's two subjects. One, geography and geospatial technology. So geospatial is taking off at the moment, but at the same time, geography as an academic subject is on the decline. And I'm just wondering, is it not, do we not require geographic skills in order to succeed if geospatial industry is to succeed? Because I suppose geography is all about understanding the relationship between issues, global issues, climate change, urban development, and just every issue that the world faces. So where do you see the role of geography in the future? And particularly in relation to the technical subjects.
Somebody want to? It's a more specific question. Barry, do you want to?
I know for sure geography has evolved into the whole oil exploration business and the whole natural resources, environmental mapping, environmental sustainability. So I don't see, I think there's a natural blend from geography into geospatial activity as well.
Again, you're standing on the shoulders of where we were to go to the next peak, if you like. So I think there's a natural transition there.
I think it's a nice example where, maybe a traditional discipline that we might have been tempted to sort of divest ourselves of because, you know, we're moving so quickly towards, as we've said several times, this new world where we can't predict what the jobs are, but then suddenly geospatial intelligence emerges as this really interesting new area that will help with oil exploration and teach us where to build our cities and show us where crime is going on and tell the taxman who to go after or whatever, you know. So I think it maybe speaks again about how certain things are more enduring perhaps than we think they are. I'm not sure if that is the person who asked the question, if that's your view as well.
We've got a thumbs up, so I think that's a really useful contribution. So we'll take a few more. I'm aware of the time. There's also quite a number of hands up, so maybe if we stay with it for a little while longer, if that's okay. Is that okay, guys?
That's fine.
Okay.
Hello. 100 years from now, do you think that brick and mortar physical universities, university campuses will be around, or will they be replaced?
I'll go with the mixed model. Since we have some, long-standing institutions, academic institutions for, going on 1,000 years, that's fantastic. But I think we'll see a lot more, virtual and open learning as well. Again, some points of it, I think there's no substitute for the actual physical, geographically, located, again, bringing people together. But of course, a lot can happen. Just over the ether as well. So I think the interesting models are already there, whereas majority of I don't know if you know the Minerva project, but if you don't, that's one to look at. I think it's a very interesting example of all the learning happening basically online. Not all, but a lot of it learning. No requirements, just projects coming together. So it is residence-based in San Francisco, but then the students go every semester somewhere different in the world. So just again, very interesting new model. Is breaking down, if you will, the walls. There is a very small physical presence. People come together in person. But then most of the learning experiences happen from everywhere, globally. So I think we're in this really interesting mixed model, but I don't think it's time to throw out some of our long-standing institutions too. There's a certain reason they've been around for a long time, not just because they're not as flexible maybe as we'd like, but there's a lot of good things that happen there again, and I'm not quick to judge history for some of those great examples. And then the future is just very bright, especially opening it up. It's been talked about a number of times. Can we reach the world? Can we make things work for 100% of humanity? Not just the fortunate, not just the elite. How do we do this? How is education for 100% of humanity? How does that become a reality?
Yeah, I agree. I think technology is going to shape the form of the physical campus of the future. It would not utterly replace it. Right now, there's several things you need to come to a physical institute for. Certain facilities like wet labs or what have you. We are seeing the growth in recent years. It's one of the big trends of buildings where students can work together on team projects and do collaborative problem solving, variously called student hubs or student fora or what have you. A lot of the new technologies actually require that people, or assume that people are going to come to the same shared face-to-face environment. Thinking of things like maker spaces, 3D printing labs, mixed reality spaces. But I mean, look at us all here today. This is a great example of maybe why we should have these physical institutes. They are identifiable places that can act as a magnet, bring people together. All kinds of serendipitous things might happen when people come together. Who can predict? So I don't think it's going to go anytime soon. And by the way, it's been predicted that by now they'll be long gone. So yeah, I don't see it happening anytime soon.
I think as well the hybrid model used the modern technology where hybrid involves recharging and so on. I think, again, as Gerard said, the fact that I think one of the major advantages of the ISU is bringing people together and keeping people together year on year and developing the university and the network and the real network of people who know people by name and by what songs they can sing and how good they are at salsa dancing or whatever else. Their characteristics, not how good they are at solving calculus or trying to find a new solution for long division problems. But it's about bringing people together. But there's a lot of information out there. And that's what worries me at the minute. There's a lot of information whether kids come into school or kids come into college. There's an awful lot of information out there. And you need to develop the critical skills, to analyze what's important, work out where this information is coming from. Because it could be, as our other friends said, it could be fake news in terms of education. But seriously, there's a lot of information out there. We need to develop the critical skills to analyze it, and you do that by benchmarking with your peers, by meeting with your peers. And again, going back to this UNESCO conference, one of the objectives of the UNESCO's Global Learning Cities campaign is to make education inclusive and accessible to all on a lifelong basis. And I think, lifelong learning, and it's not learning within these institutions. The institutions will be there because they have their values, they have their uses. They're repositories of information. They're places where research can get done a bit, slightly distant maybe from the real world and a bit more longer term. But they have a huge value from that point of view. But they should be there as a resource for the citizenry in the learning city, in the learning community. Again, as you would have noticed here in CIT, there is no gate, there is no wall around CIT. It's a totally, completely open campus. And that's what education should be.
So we're kind of running out of time, so we might take one more question. And apologies for those of you who don't get a chance to ask your question. But if we can take one more.
Do you mind? I'll jump in. Did you? Okay. Okay. Hi. Thank you for the conversation this evening. I'm going to play the devil's advocate for both a comment and a question, if you don't mind. To complement the last two rounds, my experience is that it may be a mistake to continue to push for complete distance learning, electronic learning, when all the psychological studies show that this current generation, the millennial generation, is the loneliest and personally the most isolated generation we've ever had. In that respect, electronics and the technology is not working to bring us closer together, and social media is actually anti-social media. And so I think, again, my personal experience is that perhaps we should emphasize how we can come together more and how we can spend more time with those people who are teaching us. And then the question would be, looking back 10 or 11 years ago to MIT Media Lab with Nicholas Negroponte and the invention of the one laptop per child, that was supposed to be the technology that would bring the internet and education to everyone in the world, and it failed. It failed miserably in that respect. It succeeded in spawning a highly competitive arena for small laptops, but it did not succeed. And I'd like to hear if you're aware of that project, I'd like to hear your sense of history on that.
Sure, thanks for the comment. I have the same concerns, and again, the data that you have that now we're, social media, we're all in our own echo chambers, and look at the incredible ramifications it's had. So with you, I think we have to get this right. I think we're running the experiment, and we're really pretty much at the infancy. So think about what are the good, there are some really great online materials that are very high value education, things I agree with 100%, but that's kind of on your own, very lonely. But what we're betting on, especially if you're a private, high cost providing university, we're saying we're betting on coming together, that the real value added is you can do some things online and learn some information, but that, when you come together, that's what we're betting on, actually, in terms of private universities in our model. The one, I love your example, the $100 laptop. I bought a few of them myself, and I gave them to friends and place, because when you bought one for $100, I could give them to my young cousins, but then a child that had no opportunity would get one somewhere else. There was one for one exchange. And what did we learn from that? Because it didn't work. It didn't really, spread learning out. OpenCourseWare, I think, was our more successful experiment. Again, just saying, how can we open things up? But now that education online and connectedness is here to stay, we have to connect many more people, though. Because again, I think there is a real point that's been mentioned. It should be very equitable. So how do we connect everyone? That's the first coming to it. And then when we do come together, then we realize that's the high value added. Maybe you come with that knowledge, but then when we get together, that really is a very high value. And so we should make sure that we still have much, as much or even more time in the future, I think, for the physical interaction. Just a few thoughts, but thanks for the question.
Yeah, no, very relevant. And I mentioned earlier on culture of learning, and to give that some real example is something we do actually within our team, and also some become a big practice with many of the companies we work with. because, you know, who has time for learning today? It's shown that on average someone has 23 minutes left in a week that they could do some learning on, but they might check out their Facebook profile instead. And how do you create the learning where you actually do it and make it social is a key thing. And then we not talk anti-social online, but with people together. So we do, like every Friday in our team, we sit down and have a lunch and learn. So we basically run a playlist of courses, our own and others, other material, and we pick it. And if you watch just something of it, you don't even have to complete it, you're welcome. And we sit down in a corner of our canteen and we just discuss what was there, and the stuff I've learned personally there about the subject matter, but also about my teammates, that's part of the magic to me with learning when you do that. And this is something that everyone really tries to make those Friday lunches, because we're going to have to eat anyway, but we discuss around something that we have learned. And we even have discussions where we have ended up completely dissing our own course because we didn't think it hit the point the way it should have maybe, or we found a way to apply it in what we do. And it's just that discussion is sort of is part of creating that living culture of learning to do that. And we just started doing it because we felt we really wanted to make sure we actually try to live as we preach in a sense. But then we started to just give it as example to customers, and this took off. This is one of the components that actually drives engagement around learning. We've seen that when people come together and discuss it and do it. So it's absolutely crucial. It's not an either or, it's an and. You know, they can be amplifiers for each other, online, distance, and the human piece when everyone is together. Like none of them is negating the other at all. It's again this new constellation that can amplify things much stronger.
I suppose just to speak up for doing things in a purely online way, because that's one of the things that I do. Sometimes maybe we talk too much about the convenience and flexibility of online programs, you know, as if it was sort of like the choice between going to a shop on the high street and shopping online. But for some people, that is not a choice that they get to make. This is the only way that they can reskill and upskill themselves, you know. So we'd be familiar with a lot of students who have caring responsibilities, or have sensory and physical disability, or have changing shift patterns at work, or have family responsibilities. And I think while online may have its limitations, let's say, when you compare it to the affordances and immediacy and everything else of the face-to-face environment, we shouldn't overlook that role that it can play. And I'm certainly a big believer in e-learning as that sort of humanitarian, egalitarian force that it can be, I suppose, in terms of providing those educational opportunities to people.
Okay, I think this could probably continue on for a considerable length of time, but we do have to bring it to conclusion. First of all, actually, I'd like to compliment the audience on really excellent questions, I have to say. Really interesting ones, which I think leave as many questions as answers, but actually also to thank the panel for their viewpoints on the answers and their considerations about where we're going. But I think the honesty about we're also still part of the educational system. We're learning about how we learn, and I think that we'll probably continue to do that for possibly forever. But I think if we could just show our appreciation to the panelists in the normal way with a round of applause, would be appreciated. And I know Omar now wants to also express his...
Well, we would like to thank you one more time for joining us this evening here. And on behalf of the International Space University, we would like to give you a small token here.